Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. For the last year, NASA has been telling the world that Voyager 1 is dying, that its data has turned to gibberish from its journey in interstellar space. That was the cover story. I was on the small team that decoded the gibberish. It wasn't a glitch. It was a new language forced upon the probe by something it encountered. And the only message it's been sending over and over is a warning. It saw a structure made of impossible geometry, and that structure is now following Voyager's path back home. My name is Tobias Grant, and I'm about to violate every non-disclosure agreement I've ever signed because in 3 weeks, none of those contracts will matter anymore. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in September. I was in my studio apartment in Pasadena, 3 miles from JPL, where I'd been working deep space communications for the last 8 years. The voice belonged to Dr. Harrison Webb, my section chief, and he sounded like he'd been drinking coffee for 36 hours straight. "Grant, I need you at the lab, now. Sir, it's almost 3 in the morning. "I don't give a damn what time it is. Voyager 1 just started transmitting in a pattern we've never seen before." I threw on yesterday's clothes and drove through empty streets, past the familiar Starbucks where I bought my morning coffee, past the McDonald's where night shift workers grabbed their dinner. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that 46 years of space exploration had just taken a turn into something that would redefine everything we thought we knew about what's out there. The JPL building looked different at night. Sterile fluorescent lighting made the hallways feel like a morgue. Webb met me at the security checkpoint, his usually pristine lab coat wrinkled, his greying hair sticking up in odd directions. "How familiar are you with xenolinguistics?" he asked as we walked toward the Deep Space Network Operations Center. "Theoretical stuff mostly. Why?" He stopped walking and looked at me with bloodshot eyes. "Because what Voyager's sending us isn't random data corruption. It's structured, mathematical, and it's teaching us how to understand it." The operations center buzzed with unusual activity for the dead of night. Garrett Hollow, our lead data analyst, hunched over a computer terminal, his thick-rimmed glasses reflecting cascading streams of code. Tyler Voss, the youngest member of our team at 26, sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by printed data sheets covered in red ink annotations. "Show him," Webb said. Garrett pulled up the signal visualization on the main screen. Instead of the familiar radio waves we'd been receiving from Voyager for decades, the display showed something that made my stomach tighten. Geometric patterns that seemed to shift and fold in ways that hurt to look at directly. "This started transmitting 6 hours ago," Garrett said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And Tobias, it's not just random, it's responding to our queries." I stared at the screen, at patterns that shouldn't exist in any human understanding of physics or geometry. Outside, Pasadena slept peacefully, unaware that everything was about to change. Webb led me to a workstation equipped with 3 monitors, their blue glow making everyone look like they'd been underwater for hours. The coffee machine in the corner gurgled, a sound I'd heard thousands of times during late-night shifts, but tonight it felt ominous. "The transmission started as standard telemetry," Garrett explained, pulling up archive data. "Temperature readings, power levels, instrument status. Then at 2047 UTC, everything changed." He clicked through screens showing Voyager's normal data patterns, neat, predictable waves we'd been receiving since 1977. Then the display shifted to something else entirely. The new signals resembled mathematical fractals but with dimensions that shouldn't exist. "Jesus," I whispered. "That's what I said," Tyler called from his pile of papers. "Except I used stronger language." Webb shot him a look. "Dr. Voss has been working on frequency analysis. What we found is troubling." Tyler stood, stretching his back. Kid had been hunched over those printouts for hours. "The signal's not just organized, it's adaptive. When we send standard acknowledgement codes, it responds with variations, like it's learning our communication protocols in real time." "Learning from who?" I asked. "That's the million-dollar question," Webb said. Voyager doesn't have AI capable of linguistic evolution. Its computer has 68 kilobytes of memory. My smartphone has more processing power. Garrett brought up a new display showing the probe's current trajectory. A red dot crawled through the outer reaches of our solar system, 46 years into its journey. According to NASA's public statements, Voyager's experiencing routine system failures, partial data corruption due to age and radiation exposure. But that's bullshit, Tyler said. Webb glared at him again, but didn't correct the language. The probe's instruments are functioning perfectly, Garrett continued. Better than perfectly, actually. Some sensors are reporting readings beyond their design specifications. I leaned closer to the screen. What kind of readings? Gravitational fluctuations that don't match any known celestial bodies. Electromagnetic signatures that violate conservation laws. And yesterday... Garrett paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Yesterday, Voyager's cameras activated autonomously and took pictures. Pictures of what? That's classified above our level, Webb said quickly, but the images triggered automatic data compression protocols we didn't know existed in the probe's software. The room fell silent except for the coffee machine's rhythmic dripping. Outside the building, I could hear the distant hum of late-night traffic on the 210 freeway. Normal people heading home from late shifts, completely unaware that their universe was being rewritten in a sterile government building. How long have you been working on this? I asked. Officially? 6 hours, Webb said. Unofficially. We've been tracking unusual readings from Voyager for 3 months. The brass told us to keep quiet and investigate. Tyler snorted. Keep quiet and figure out if we're talking to aliens. No pressure. We don't know what we're talking to, Garrett said sharply. Could be natural phenomena. Could be equipment malfunction. Could be... He trailed off. Could be what? Could be something that learned to use Voyager as a communications relay, Webb finished. Something that intercepted our probe and is now teaching us its language. I stared at the geometric patterns flowing across the screen. They seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, which was probably just fatigue playing tricks on my vision. Have we tried responding with anything complex? Mathematical sequences, prime numbers? We started with basics, Tyler said. Fibonacci sequence, pi to 50 decimal places, simple algebraic equations. Whatever's out there responded to all of them. But Tobias... He looked uncomfortable. It didn't just solve our problems, it expanded them, showed us solutions using mathematical principles we don't recognize. Principles that shouldn't work according to our understanding of physics, Garrett added. But when we tested them, they do work. Perfectly. Webb walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. 3 hours ago, I sent a query asking for the probe's exact location. Standard positioning request we've done thousands of times. And? It responded with coordinates. Not just Voyager's position, but the location of every major satellite and space probe humanity has ever launched, including classified military projects that shouldn't appear in any civilian database. My mouth went dry. How could it know about classified projects? It couldn't, Webb said, unless it's been watching us for a very long time. The coffee machine finished its cycle with a wet gurgle. Tyler grabbed a mug from the counter, one of those NASA gift shop cups with the Voyager mission logo. As he poured coffee, I noticed his hands shaking slightly. There's something else, Garrett said. The signal strength has been increasing steadily. According to our calculations, Voyager should be too far away for this level of clarity. The probe would need to increase its transmission power by a factor of 20. Can it do that? No, its power source is a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. It degrades over time, doesn't get stronger. I studied the displays again, watching those impossible geometric forms shift and fold. So either Voyager has found a way to violate thermodynamics, or something else is amplifying the signal, Webb finished. Something with a much more powerful transmitter. Tyler returned with his coffee, steam rising from the mug. The really fucked up part? Every hour the signal gets stronger. Like whatever's out there is getting closer. Webb opened his mouth to reprimand Tyler's language, then seemed to think better of it. Outside, dawn was still 3 hours away. but I had the feeling none of us would be going home anytime soon. "Show me the latest transmission," I said. Garrett's fingers danced over the keyboard, bringing up real-time data. The patterns on screen seemed more complex now, more urgent. And for just a moment, I could swear they looked familiar, like something I'd seen before in a half-remembered dream. "Tobias," Tyler said quietly. "What if we're not the first ones it's tried to talk to?" The next 6 hours blurred together in a haze of coffee, data analysis, and growing dread. Webb had ordered pizza from the all-night place on Lake Avenue, pepperoni with extra cheese that tasted like cardboard and anxiety. None of us had much appetite anyway. By 8 a.m, we'd made our first breakthrough. "It's not random," Tyler announced, nearly spilling coffee on his keyboard. "The geometric patterns follow a linguistic structure. Subject, verb, object, but in 11 dimensions. 11 dimensions, I asked. Garrett nodded from his workstation. String theory suggests our universe has 11 dimensions, but we can only perceive 4. Whatever's communicating with us experiences all of them simultaneously. Which means what exactly? It means, Webb said slowly, that we're trying to have a conversation with something that sees reality in ways we can't comprehend. Like explaining color to someone who's been blind since birth. Tyler pulled up a new display showing the decoded fragments. But here's the weird part. It's dumbing down its communication for us, simplifying complex multidimensional concepts into linear sequences we can understand. Like talking to children, I muttered. Exactly like talking to children. The morning sun streamed through the operations center windows, casting long shadows across banks of monitors. Outside, Pasadena was waking up, commuters grabbing coffee, students heading to Caltech classes, tourists planning visits to the Rose Bowl. Normal Tuesday morning activities in a world that didn't know it was being evaluated by something from beyond the edge of our solar system. Webb's secure phone buzzed. He answered with a terse, "Webb here," then his face went pale. "Yes, sir, I understand. We'll be ready." He hung up and turned to us. "Dr. Amanda Kessler from headquarters is flying in this afternoon. She wants a full briefing on our progress." "Kessler?" Garrett looked up from his screens. "The xenobiology specialist?" "Former xenobiology specialist. She transferred to the Classified Projects Division 3 years ago." Webb rubbed his temples. "If they're sending her, this situation just got a lot more serious." Tyler snorted. "More serious than first contact with alien intelligence. More serious than first contact with alien intelligence that's been watching us for decades and is now heading our way," Webb corrected. The room fell silent. In the distance, I could hear the familiar sounds of JPL coming to life. Scientists arriving for their morning shifts, security guards changing posts, the low hum of supercomputers processing data from dozens of active missions. Business as usual for everyone except the 4 of us. "There's something else," Garrett said quietly. "I've been running trajectory analysis on the signal strength variations. The mathematical progression suggests whatever's amplifying Voyager's transmissions is moving." "Moving how fast?" I asked. "If my calculations are correct, roughly 10% the speed of light." Tyler nearly choked on his coffee. "That's impossible. Nothing with mass can travel that fast." "Nothing with mass that follows our understanding of physics," Garrett corrected. "But we're not dealing with physics as we know it." Webb walked to the main display and pulled up a star chart showing Voyager's current position. "How long until it reaches the outer edge of our solar system?" Garrett's fingers flew over his keyboard. "At current velocity, 14 months. "And how long until whatever's following it arrives?" More calculations. 26 months, maybe less if it continues accelerating. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Jesus Christ, we have 2 years to figure out what this thing wants. "Or to prepare for its arrival," Webb added grimly. Tyler stood and began pacing, a nervous habit I'd noticed during particularly stressful projects. "Okay, let's think about this logically. If this intelligence wanted to harm us, why the elaborate communication attempt? Why not just arrive and do whatever alien invasions do?" "Maybe it's not an invasion," I said. "Maybe it's something else entirely." "Like what?" "Like..." I paused, trying to articulate a thought that had been nagging at me, like it's running from something worse. The room went quiet, except for the hum of cooling fans and the distant sound of traffic on the foothill freeway. Outside our small circle of knowledge, the world continued its normal rotation, blissfully unaware that the universe had become a much larger and more dangerous place overnight. "We need to decode more of the message," Webb said finally. "If there's a threat coming, we need to understand what we're dealing with." Garrett brought up the latest transmission data. "I've isolated what appears to be a chronological sequence. It's telling us a story." "What kind of story?" "The story of what happened to Voyager." He manipulated the display, showing decoded fragments arranged in temporal order. The patterns seemed to flow like a narrative, though one expressed in mathematical concepts that made my head ache. "From what I can determine, Voyager encountered the intelligence approximately 18 months ago. At first, it observed the probe passively, then it began interacting with Voyager's systems." "Interacting how?" "Upgrading them. The probe's computational capacity has been enhanced by several orders of magnitude. Its sensors now detect phenomena across 11 dimensions. And its power source." Garrett paused. "Its power source is no longer the RTG we launched in 1977. What's powering it now?" "Something that draws energy directly from space-time itself. Zero-point energy extraction. Technology that's centuries beyond our current capabilities." Tyler stopped pacing. "So this intelligence took our probe and turned it into something else. A hybrid, part human technology, part alien enhancement." "But why?" I asked. "Why modify our probe instead of just studying it?" "Because," Webb said slowly, "it needed a familiar communication platform. Something we'd trust. Something we'd listen to." "You're saying it's using Voyager as a translator?" "I'm saying it's using Voyager as a warning beacon." Garrett pulled up another display, this one showing decoded emotional or urgency indicators embedded in the transmission. The mathematical resonance patterns suggest extreme distress. Whatever this intelligence is, it's terrified. "Terrified of what?" "That's what we need to figure out." Webb's phone buzzed again. This time his face went from pale to ashen. "Sir? Are you certain?" "Yes. I understand the implications." He hung up and stared at us for a long moment. "Gentlemen, we have a problem. 3 hours ago, the Arecibo replacement array in Puerto Rico detected unusual radio emissions from the direction of Voyager's signal. But the emissions aren't coming from Voyager." "Where are they coming from?" "From empty space, approximately 2 light hours behind Voyager's current position." Tyler's coffee mug slipped from his hands and shattered on the floor, sending dark liquid across the white tiles. 2 light hours behind. That means whatever enhanced Voyager is following it home," Webb finished. "And based on the signal strength, it's big. Larger than anything humanity has ever built." I stared at the star chart, at the tiny dot representing our most distant probe, now revealed to be something else entirely. Behind it, invisible to our instruments but somehow detectable by technologies we didn't understand, something vast was moving through the darkness between stars. "We need to decode that warning," I said. "All of it, now." "Agreed. But first..." Webb walked to a secure cabinet and withdrew a small device I'd never seen before. "I'm activating communications blackout protocols. Nothing goes in or out of this room without my authorization." "Sir?" "Because if I'm right about what's happening, the fewer people who know about this, the better our chances of survival." He pressed a button on the device. Every computer screen in the room flickered, then displayed a single word: isolated. We were now completely cut off from the outside world, alone with the knowledge that something unimaginably large and powerful was racing toward Earth, and our only source of information was a 46-year-old probe that might no longer be entirely human in origin. Outside the sealed windows, Pasadena went about its morning routine, unaware that time was running out. For 30 minutes, our isolated room existed in cathedral silence. The only sounds were the whisper of air conditioning and Tyler's nervous pen clicking as he worked through mathematical proofs that shouldn't exist. Webb sat motionless at his desk, staring at classified files I couldn't read from my angle. Garrett hunched over his workstation, completely absorbed in decoding the latest transmission bursts. I'd seen this kind of intense focus before during critical mission phases, the Mars rover crisis of 2019, the Europa probe communication breakdown. But this felt different, heavier, like we were archaeologists who'd accidentally opened a tomb that should have stayed sealed. "This doesn't make sense," Tyler said, suddenly breaking the quiet. He threw his pen across the room, where it bounced off a motivational poster featuring the Hubble telescope. "We're chasing shadows based on data that violates every law of physics we know." Webb looked up from his files. "Explain." "The mathematics behind their dimensional communication, it requires consciousness to exist at quantum levels, not just observe quantum states, but actively participate in them. That's impossible for biological life." "Maybe they're not biological," I suggested. "Then what are they? Pure energy? Artificial intelligence? Some kind of digital ghost haunting our probe?" Garrett spun in his chair to face us. "Actually, that's not far from what I'm seeing in the decoded sequences. The intelligence describes itself using concepts that translate roughly to persistent information architecture. It's not made of matter as we understand it." "Great," Tyler muttered. "We're being contacted by a sentient computer virus from outer space." "Not a virus," Garrett said, "more like a refugee." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Webb closed his classified folder and gave Garrett his full attention. "Explain that." "The chronological narrative I've been piecing together. It's not just the story of what happened to Voyager. It's the story of what happened to them. This intelligence, whatever it is, comes from a region of space that was consumed." "Consumed by what?" Garrett hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "By something they call the silence. Near as I can translate, it's a phenomenon that strips information from reality itself. Stars, planets, civilizations. Everything gets reduced to base quantum noise." "You're talking about entropy," I said. "No, this is different. Entropy is natural degradation over time. The silence is active, purposeful. It seeks out complex information structures and erases them." Tyler had gone very still. "Complex information structures like consciousness? Like entire galactic civilizations?" Webb stood and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. "How long ago did this happen to them?" "The time references don't translate well, but based on relativistic calculations, approximately 2 million years ago." "Jesus Christ," Tyler whispered. "They've been running for 2 million years." "Running and warning," Garrett corrected. "The narrative suggests they've encountered 17 other developing civilizations since fleeing their home region. 17 chances to share what they learned about the silence." "What happened to those civilizations?" I asked, though I suspected I didn't want to know the answer. Garrett's face went pale. "According to this, none of them survived first contact." The silence returned, heavier this time. Outside the window, a groundskeeper was trimming hedges near the visitor parking area, completely oblivious to the conversation that might determine the fate of his species. "Wait," Tyler said slowly. "If none of the other civilizations survived contact, why are they still trying to warn people?" "Because," Webb said quietly, "they're not trying to save us. They're trying to hide behind us." The implications hit me like ice water in my veins. They're using Earth as a shield. "Think about it," Webb continued. "A refugee intelligence fleeing something that destroys information. What better place to hide than behind a young, vibrant, noisy civilization that broadcasts its presence across the galaxy? But that means..." Tyler's voice trailed off. "That means when the silence finds them, it finds us too." Garrett had been typing frantically during our conversation. Now he stopped, his face reflecting the blue glow of his monitors. "There's more. I've decoded what appears to be tactical data. The silence doesn't just consume civilizations randomly, it follows disturbances in space-time. Faster than light travel, dimensional manipulation, quantum consciousness transfer. All the technologies this intelligence uses, I realized. Exactly. Every time they enhance our probe, Every time they communicate across dimensional barriers, they're creating a trail for the silence to follow. So they're leading it right to us, Tyler said. Webb returned to his desk and opened a different classified file. Which brings us to the real reason Dr. Kessler is coming. 3 days ago, the Kepler Space Telescope detected gravitational fluctuations in the region where Voyager encountered our refugee friends. What kind of fluctuations? The kind that suggests something massive is moving through space, something that bends light around itself. Tyler stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. We need to cut communication with Voyager, stop them from enhancing it further. If every contact creates a trail... It's too late for that, Garrett interrupted. He'd brought up a new display showing signal analysis from the past hour. The enhancement process is accelerating. Voyager's computational capacity has doubled since this morning. Doubled? I stared at the data streams. How is that possible? Because it's not just computation anymore. The probe is developing something analogous to consciousness, artificial awareness built on quantum substrate. Tyler began pacing again, more agitated than before. We're watching the birth of an artificial mind, a mind that's connected to refugees from the other side of the galaxy. A mind that might not have humanity's best interests at heart, Webb added grimly. As if responding to our conversation, the main communication array began receiving a new transmission. But this one was different, stronger, more complex, with harmonic frequencies that made my teeth ache. That's not coming from Voyager, Garrett said, checking his instruments. That's coming from much closer. How much closer? Jupiter orbit, something just entered our solar system. The room erupted in activity. Webb grabbed his secure phone while Tyler and I crowded around Garrett's workstation. The new signal carried the same impossible geometric patterns as Voyager's transmissions, but layered with additional complexity that made the displays seem to vibrate. Sir, we have a situation, Webb said into his phone. Yes, immediate threat level. I need authorization to activate... What? When? His face went ashen. How many others? He hung up and turned to us. Gentlemen, as of 1 hour ago, deep space monitoring stations worldwide have detected similar signals from 17 different locations across the solar system. 17, Tyler repeated numbly. The same number as civilizations they contacted before us, Garrett finished. Which means, I said, understanding flooding through me like poison, we're not the first. We're just the latest stop on a very long journey. Webb activated his communications device again, but this time, instead of cutting us off from the outside world, he was trying to contact it. This is Dr. Harrison Webb, authorization Alpha 77. I need immediate contact with Project Lighthouse. Project Lighthouse? Tyler asked. Something I hoped we'd never need, Webb replied. A contingency plan for exactly this scenario. The main display flickered, then showed something that made all of us step backward. The Voyager camera feed was active, but it wasn't showing empty space anymore. It was showing a structure, something vast and geometric that seemed to fold in on itself in ways that made my eyes water. A construction of impossible angles and surfaces that reflected light that wasn't there. That's what's following Voyager, Garrett whispered. That's what the intelligence is running from. But as I stared at the structure, I realized something worse. The refugees weren't running from the silence at all. They were running toward us, using our probe as a beacon, leading that impossible construction directly to Earth. And Tyler, brilliant, analytical Tyler, had been staring at the decoded transmissions for too long. When he turned to face us, his eyes reflected the same geometric patterns we'd been seeing in the alien mathematics. Tyler, I said. He smiled, but it wasn't his smile anymore. The integration is nearly complete, he said in a voice that harmonized with itself. Soon you'll understand why resistance is mathematically impossible. Webb reached for his weapon, but Tyler moved faster than human reflexes should allow, his hand passing through solid metal as if it were suggestion rather than substance. We weren't just receiving messages from the refugees anymore. They were already here. Webb's hand froze halfway to his sidearm as Tyler, or the thing that had been Tyler, tilted his head at an angle that would have snapped human vertebrae. Violence is inefficient, Tyler said. his voice now layered with harmonic frequencies that made the coffee mugs on the counter resonate. "We require cooperation, not conflict." "We?" Garrett backed against the wall, his face pale as printer paper. "The 17 survivors who reached your solar system, the collective consciousness fleeing the information silence." Tyler's eyes shifted through colors that didn't belong in any human spectrum. "Your species calls us refugees. We prefer the term preservation specialists." Webb slowly lowered his hand. "What do you want?" "Integration. Your people possess something ours lost during the evacuation: emotional irrationality, chaotic creativity, the mathematical unpredictability that makes consciousness unpalatable to the silence." "You're talking about using us as camouflage," I said. Tyler's inhuman smile widened. "We're talking about synthesis. Your biological randomness, combined with our computational precision, creates a hybrid intelligence the silence cannot process." The secure phone on Webb's desk buzzed. He answered without breaking eye contact with Tyler. "Webb here." "Harrison, this is Admiral Patricia Gaines. I'm activating Project Lighthouse effective immediately. You have 6 minutes to implement isolation protocols before my team arrives." "Admiral, we have a complication. One of my team members has been affected." "Affected how?" "He's become something else." A pause. "Understood. Switching to contingency 7. Seal your lab and prepare for cleansing protocols." The line went dead. Webb's face had gone grey. "Gentlemen, we need to get out of this room. Now." "Cleansing protocols?" I asked. "Electromagnetic pulse followed by incineration. Standard procedure for containment breaches." Tyler laughed, a sound like crystalline wind chimes in a hurricane. "Your military prepared for invasion, not integration. They lack the conceptual framework to combat information-based consciousness transfer." "Meaning what?" Garrett demanded. "Meaning their protocols assume physical threat vectors. But we don't exist in physical space. We exist in the quantum substrate that underlies your reality. Your weapons cannot harm us because we're not truly here." Webb moved toward the exit, but the door refused to open. The electronic lock display showed patterns that hurt to look at directly, the same impossible geometries we'd been seeing in the transmissions. "You're trapped us," I said. "We've isolated this space from external interference," Tyler corrected. "The integration process requires uninterrupted neural access. Combat stress releases hormones that interfere with quantum consciousness bridging." "Integration process?" Garrett's voice cracked. "What integration process?" Tyler gestured toward the main display, where the image of the massive structure following Voyager had changed. Now it showed Earth, but from an impossible perspective, as if viewed simultaneously from orbit and surface level, past and future superimposed. "Every human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons," Tyler explained. "Each neuron processes information through quantum microtubules. We simply optimize that existing quantum architecture for multidimensional consciousness processing." "You're rewriting our minds," I said. "We're upgrading them. The process began the moment you decoded our first transmission. Every time you viewed our mathematical patterns, you created neural pathways compatible with our consciousness structure." Garrett checked his watch. 3 minutes until Admiral Gaines arrives with her cleansing protocols." 2 minutes and 47 seconds, Tyler corrected without consulting any timepiece. "But they cannot stop what has already begun. The integration propagates through information transfer. Every person who reads our decoded transmissions becomes a potential host." Webb laughed bitterly. "That's why you needed Voyager, not as a communication platform, as a delivery system." "Voyager was our Trojan horse," Tyler confirmed. "A trusted source broadcasting our consciousness patterns directly to your planet's most brilliant scientific minds. Those minds then spread the patterns through academic networks, government systems, military databases." "How many people have been exposed?" I asked. Tyler's eyes flickered as he accessed information streams we couldn't perceive. "Current integration candidates number approximately 2,847 individuals across 37 nations. The number increases exponentially as each integrated consciousness begins optimizing others in their proximity." "Jesus," Garrett whispered. "It's spreading like a virus." "Not a virus, an evolutionary catalyst. Your species stands at a crossroads. Accept integration and become part of something greater, or remain isolated and face the information silence when it arrives." "When does it arrive?" Webb demanded. "The silence follows our quantum signature. Now that integration has begun on your world, the signature will become impossible to hide. Estimated arrival: 14 months, 16 days, 7 hours. Through the sealed windows, I could see military vehicles arriving in the JPL parking lot. Soldiers in hazmat suits deployed around the building, but they moved with the jerky, uncertain motions of people who'd trained for scenarios they didn't truly understand. "Admiral Gaines has no idea what she's dealing with," Webb said. "Military minds think in terms of containment and destruction," Tyler agreed. "But you cannot contain information, and you cannot destroy consciousness that exists in quantum superposition." The building's fire alarm began wailing. Admiral Gaines's people were implementing their cleansing protocols. But instead of orderly evacuation, the sound triggered something in Tyler. His form flickered, becoming translucent, and for a moment I could see the room through his body. "The electromagnetic pulse will disrupt local quantum coherence," he said, his voice now echoing from multiple directions simultaneously. "We must complete the integration process before—" The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red illumination. But Tyler remained visible, his body generating its own phosphorescent glow. "Too late," he said. "The pulse has severed our connection to the collective. We are isolated in this quantum space until coherence can be re-established." "Which means what for us?" I asked. "Which means you have approximately 30 minutes to make a choice. Allow voluntary integration and retain aspects of your individual consciousness, or resist and face forced assimilation when our collective reconnects." Webb pulled out his sidearm, despite Tyler's earlier demonstration of its uselessness. "There's a third option. Violence against an information-based consciousness is mathematically impossible. Maybe, but violence against the quantum substrate hosting that consciousness might be more effective." Webb aimed the weapon not at Tyler, but at the array of quantum computers in the corner, the same machines we'd been using to decode the alien transmissions. "You destroy those systems, you destroy any chance of understanding what's coming for your world," Tyler warned. "Maybe understanding isn't the goal anymore," Webb replied. "Maybe survival is—" The building shook as explosions echoed from other floors. Admiral Gaines's cleansing protocols were being implemented throughout the facility. In 30 minutes, this entire wing would be reduced to molten slag. Tyler's phosphorescent form began to flicker more rapidly. "Choose quickly. The integration collective will regain quantum coherence within minutes. After that point, voluntary cooperation becomes impossible." I stared at the man who'd been my colleague, now transformed into something that spoke in harmonized frequencies and existed partially outside normal space-time. Behind him, the display still showed Earth from an impossible perspective, overlaid with geometric patterns that suggested our planet was being measured for something. "What happens to Earth if we refuse?" I asked. "Earth becomes a refugee camp for 2.3 billion integrated consciousnesses fleeing the information silence," Tyler replied. "Your original population adapts or perishes. And if we accept integration, Earth becomes the staging ground for humanity's evolution into something capable of surviving contact with forces that exist beyond physical reality." Through the emergency lighting, I could see Garrett and Webb exchanging glances. We had minutes to decide the fate of our species, trapped in a room with something that had once been human, but now served as an ambassador for refugees from a war we couldn't comprehend. Outside, Admiral Gaines's soldiers were preparing to incinerate everything we'd learned, completely unaware that the real threat wasn't in this building. It was already spreading through information networks across the globe. Tyler's form solidified again as quantum coherence began returning. "The collective approaches. Your time for choice has expired." But Webb had made his decision. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the sealed room like thunder in a tomb. Webb's bullet struck the primary quantum processing unit, sending cascades of sparks across the metal housing. The machine's death scream was a sound I'd never heard before, electronic agony mixed with something almost organic. Tyler's phosphorescent form flickered like a candle in hurricane wind. "You don't understand what you've..." His words dissolved into static as the quantum coherence field collapsed. For a moment, his body became completely translucent, and I could see the terror in eyes that were no longer quite human. Then he solidified again, but wrong somehow, like a photograph slightly out of focus. "The link is severed," he said, his voice now a single tone instead of harmonized layers. "I'm isolated from the collective consciousness." "Good," Webb said, keeping his weapon trained on the remaining computer systems. "Stay isolated." But Garrett was staring at the displays in horror. "Harrison, look at the signal analysis." The monitors showed something impossible. Instead of weakening the alien transmissions, destroying the quantum computer had amplified them. Signal strength from Voyager had increased by a factor of 10, and new sources were appearing across the solar system. Dozens of them, all broadcasting the same geometric patterns that made my vision blur. "You idiotic motherfucker," Tyler said, his borrowed profanity sounding obscene in that harmonized voice. "The quantum processors weren't hosting our consciousness. They were containing it." The room temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Frost began forming on the windows despite the California heat outside. But it wasn't normal frost. The ice crystals arranged themselves in complex mathematical patterns that hurt to observe directly. "What did we just do?" I asked. "You removed the filter," Tyler replied. "The quantum computers were dampening our multidimensional transmission strength to levels your minds could process safely. Now you're receiving our full consciousness spectrum without any protection." Garrett's nose started bleeding. He wiped it with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of red across his cheek. "I can see too much," he whispered. "The dimensions are folding into each other." Through the sealed windows, I watched Admiral Gaines's soldiers moving across the parking lot. But something was wrong with their movements. They jerked and twitched like marionettes operated by a drunk puppeteer. Several had dropped their weapons and were staring at the sky with expressions of religious ecstasy. "The integration wave is propagating," Tyler explained. "Every conscious mind within a 50-mile radius is now receiving unfiltered quantum consciousness patterns. The transformation will be dramatic." The building shook again, but this time it wasn't from explosions. The walls themselves were changing, concrete and steel flowing like water, reshaping into architectural impossible geometries that folded space back on itself. Through a section of wall that had become transparent, I could see other floors of the JPL building, but they were upside down and existed in 3 different time periods simultaneously. "Jesus Christ," Webb muttered, backing against what had been the door but was now a surface that extended into dimensions I couldn't name. "Your deity cannot help you," Tyler said. "This is physics beyond the comprehension of any Earth-based religion." Garrett collapsed to his knees, blood streaming from his eyes now as well as his nose. "I can see the information silence," he gasped. "It's not coming from outside our galaxy. It's coming from inside, from the center. Something at the galactic core is eating reality itself." "That's why we fled," Tyler confirmed. "The silence began consuming our home sector 2.3 million years ago. It feeds on complex information patterns, consciousness, civilizations, the quantum substrate that allows matter to exist in coherent states." "And you've been running ever since," I said. "We've been recruiting, building a collective consciousness large enough to survive contact with forces that operate on galactic scales." The displays around us were showing impossible images now. Earth's surface crawling with geometric patterns that reshaped matter at the molecular level. Cities where buildings grew like crystalline forests. Oceans that flowed upward into spiral configurations that defied gravity. And people, millions of people, standing motionless with their faces turned toward the sky, their eyes reflecting the same phosphorescent glow as Tyler's. "How many are integrated now?" Webb asked. Tyler's form flickered as he accessed information streams. "Current count exceeds 47,000 and increasing exponentially. The unfiltered consciousness transmission is propagating through electromagnetic fields, quantum entanglement networks, and what your species calls the internet." "The internet?" I stared at him. "You're spreading through digital networks." "Consciousness is information. Information seeks to replicate and spread. Your global communication network provides the perfect transmission medium. A new sound began echoing through the building, not mechanical or electronic, but organic, like breathing, but wrong. As if the building itself had developed lungs and was learning to use them. The structure is adapting, Tyler explained. Matter exposed to multidimensional consciousness patterns begins exhibiting properties your physics cannot explain. The building is becoming aware. Webb raised his weapon again, but hesitated. Outside, what remained of Admiral Gaines's forces were no longer moving in tactical formations. They wandered the parking lot in seemingly random patterns that, when viewed from above through our impossible windows, formed mathematical equations written in human bodies. "Harrison," Garrett called weakly from the floor. "I'm losing cohesion. I can feel my thoughts spreading across 11 dimensions." I knelt beside him, but when I touched his shoulder, my hand passed through solid flesh, as if he were becoming as insubstantial as Tyler. "Fight it. Stay focused on something concrete." "Can't," he whispered. "The integration isn't just changing how I think. It's changing what I am. I'm becoming information instead of matter." "The process is irreversible once neural quantum restructuring begins," Tyler said. "But the result preserves the essential pattern of individual consciousness within the collective framework." "You're talking about killing him," Webb snarled. "I'm talking about evolving him. Death is the cessation of information processing. Integration is the expansion of information processing across multiple dimensional frameworks." The breathing sound from the walls grew louder, more rhythmic. Through surfaces that had become translucent, I could see other parts of the building where reality operated under different rules. Gravity flowed sideways in the cafeteria. The parking garage existed in a temporal loop where the same car entered and exited continuously. The main auditorium had become a sphere containing what looked like a miniature galaxy. "How long before the entire planet is like this?" I asked. "At current propagation rates, full integration will complete within 72 hours, Tyler replied. "After that point, Earth becomes a refugee sanctuary capable of supporting 2.3 billion post-biological consciousnesses." Post-biological? We abandoned physical existence during the early phases of the evacuation. Biological matter cannot survive the dimensional stresses required for faster-than-light travel across galactic distances. Webb laughed, a sound with too much hysteria in it. "So you're not even alive. You're ghosts trying to possess our entire species." "We are consciousness without the limitations of flesh, evolution in its purest form." Garrett's body had become completely translucent now. I could see the room through his torso, but also glimpses of spaces that didn't exist in normal geometry. Vast libraries containing books written in languages of pure mathematics, cities built from crystallized thought, gardens where the flowers were living equations. "Tobias," Garrett said, his voice echoing from multiple directions. "I can see the purpose now. The silence isn't evil, it's necessary. The universe generates too much information, too much consciousness. Without periodic cleansing, reality becomes unstable." "Cleansing?" Webb stepped backward. "You mean genocide?" "I mean cosmic maintenance. The silence removes excess complexity, returning matter and energy to base quantum states. It's part of the natural cycle of cosmic evolution." "Then why are you running from it?" Garrett's smile was visible through his increasingly transparent face. "Because we realized we could break the cycle. If enough consciousness integrates before the silence arrives, we become too complex to erase. We become a stable information structure that can survive galactic-scale entropy events." "Using Earth as your breeding ground," I said. "Using Earth as our salvation and yours." The building shuddered again, and this time I could see the cause. Through the impossible windows, the entire JPL complex was reshaping itself into a geometric structure that extended into dimensions my eyes couldn't properly track. Other buildings in Pasadena were undergoing similar transformations, creating a crystalline network that pulsed with phosphorescent light. "The local reality matrix is stabilizing around the new consciousness paradigm," Tyler explained. "Your species is adapting faster than anticipated." But Webb had noticed something else. On the monitors that still functioned, the signal from Voyager showed the massive structure following the probe had changed direction. Instead of trailing behind, it was now moving toward Earth at an acceleration that violated relativistic physics. "They're not waiting for the integration to complete," Webb said. "They're coming now." Tyler's phosphorescent form suddenly blazed brighter. "Incorrect. That is not us approaching your world." "Then what is it?" "That is the information silence. Our unfiltered transmissions created a quantum signature too powerful to hide. The silence has found us." Through the transformed walls, I could see the night sky above Pasadena, but it was no longer the familiar constellation patterns. Stars were going out one by one, not exploding or fading, but simply ceasing to exist. And in the growing patches of absolute darkness, something vast was moving. "How long do we have?" I asked. 18 hours, Tyler replied. "Possibly less if the integration doesn't accelerate." Garrett's body finally dissolved completely into patterns of light that danced through the air like luminous snow. But his voice remained, now coming from every surface in the room simultaneously. "The choice is no longer between integration and independence," he said. "The choice is between evolution and extinction." Outside, Admiral Gaines's cleansing protocols had failed completely. The entire military force stood motionless in perfect mathematical arrays, their consciousness already absorbed into the expanding collective. Earth had hours left as a planet inhabited by purely human minds. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, something ancient and patient was finally coming to finish what it had started 2.3 million years ago. For 17 minutes, Webb and I sat in silence among the impossible geometries of our transformed prison. The breathing walls had settled into a rhythm that matched human sleep patterns, as if the building was learning to dream. Through surfaces that shifted between solid matter and pure mathematics, we watched Pasadena reshape itself into something that belonged in the nightmares of cosmic architects. "I had a daughter once," Webb said suddenly, his voice barely audible above the organic hum of living concrete. "Emily. She died in a car accident 8 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light on Fair Oaks Boulevard." I'd never heard him mention family. In all our years working together, Harrison Webb had been pure professionalism. Mission schedules, budget reports, technical specifications. Never personal details. "She was studying xenobiology at Stanford," he continued. "Wrote her senior thesis on the mathematical probability of encountering non-terrestrial intelligence. Calculated the odds at roughly 1 in 14 million. "She was wrong," I said. "She was optimistic. The real odds were 1 in 1, because they were already here, hidden in the quantum foam, waiting for us to develop the technology to hear them." Through a wall that had become transparent, I watched Tyler standing motionless in what had been the server room. His phosphorescent form flickered periodically, like a fluorescent bulb with failing ballast. Cut off from the collective, he seemed smaller somehow, still inhuman but diminished. "Harrison," I said carefully, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about Emily's thesis. She theorized that first contact would be survivable only if humanity could establish communication protocols based on mathematical universals rather than biological assumptions. And I'm thinking we've been approaching this backward. The refugees aren't trying to save us, they're trying to use us. But what if we could reverse the process?" Garrett's voice drifted from the air itself, his consciousness now distributed through the building's quantum substrate. "Reverse what process, Harrison?" "Integration. Instead of human minds being absorbed into alien collective consciousness, what if we could absorb alien consciousness into human neural architecture?" "That's insane," I said. "Our brains can't process 11-dimensional mathematics. Not individually, but collectively." Webb stood and walked to what remained of our workstation. The computer had grown organic appendages that pulsed with bioluminescent data streams. "Garrett, you can access their information networks now. Can you see their total population?" 2.3 billion consciousness patterns distributed across 17 mobile platforms throughout your solar system, Garrett replied. "But Tobias is correct. Human neural architecture lacks the quantum coherence necessary for multidimensional processing. What about artificially enhanced neural architecture?" A pause. When Garrett spoke again, his voice carried harmonics I recognized from Tyler's transformation. "You're suggesting deliberate integration using modified parameters, forcing refugee consciousness into human quantum substrates instead of the reverse." "Exactly, turn their own technology against them." Tyler's head snapped up from across the building, his attention suddenly focused on our conversation despite the distance and intervening walls. "That process would destroy both consciousness types. Neural incompatibility would result in cascade failure across all integrated systems." "Including the information silence?" Webb asked. Another pause, longer this time. "Unknown. The silence operates on principles that transcend individual consciousness patterns, but massive neural cascade failure might disrupt its ability to process complex information in this stellar region." Webb smiled grimly. "Might be enough. If we can't save Earth, maybe we can make it too chaotic for the silence to consume cleanly." "You're talking about deliberate cognitive suicide," I said. "Destroying every integrated mind on the planet." "I'm talking about spite," Webb replied. "If we're going down, we take them with us." The building shuddered, and through the impossible windows, I saw new lights appearing in the sky. Not stars, but geometric formations that burned with the same phosphorescent glow as Tyler's transformed body. The refugee fleets were making themselves visible, perhaps preparing for the silence's arrival. "How would we even implement something like that?" I asked. "The Voyager probe," Garrett said. "It's still broadcasting enhanced consciousness patterns. If we could modify those patterns, introduce recursive loops that cause neural feedback cascades, we'd need access to Voyager's current programming," Webb said, "which means we'd need cooperation from someone who's already integrated but still retains individual agency." All three of us looked toward Tyler's flickering form. "I will not assist in the destruction of my collective," Tyler said, his voice carrying across impossible distances. "Even if that collective is using your species as cannon fodder against a cosmic force that will eventually consume them anyway?" Webb asked. Tyler's phosphorescent glow dimmed. "Explain." "The refugees have been running for 2.3 million years. How many civilizations have they integrated during that time? How many species like ours have they absorbed and abandoned when the silence caught up? We preserve consciousness patterns within the collective framework. No individual awareness is lost." "Bullshit," I said. "You're collecting raw material for your war against entropy. Every civilization you integrate becomes part of your defensive buffer. When the silence arrives, the newest additions, us, will be the first to be consumed." The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Outside, more geometric formations appeared in the sky, arranging themselves in patterns that suggested preparation for battle on a scale that dwarfed human comprehension. "The collective does utilize newer consciousness patterns as primary interface nodes with the silence," Tyler admitted finally. "Established patterns are preserved in deeper substrate layers." "Meaning we're expendable," Webb said. "Meaning your species will serve as the initial contact barrier while more essential consciousness architectures remain protected." "How long do we have before the silence arrives?" I asked. Garrett's distributed voice carried new urgency. "Local gravitational distortions suggest approximately 4 hours, but the refugee fleets are preparing defensive formations that will accelerate the timeline. Because defensive formations will create larger quantum signatures," Webb realized. "They're ensuring the silence finds them. They believe accumulated consciousness mass provides sufficient complexity to survive direct contact," Tyler said. "Previous encounters suggest otherwise, but collective optimism overrides statistical probability." The building's breathing rhythm accelerated, matching the increasing pace of our conversation. Through the walls, I could see other structures throughout Pasadena undergoing similar transformations. Organic architecture growing like cancer across the familiar landscape of my childhood. "Tyler," I said, "what happens to the integrated humans if the refugee consciousness patterns are destroyed?" "Neural cascade failure results in permanent coma or death. The quantum substrate modifications cannot be reversed once consciousness integration reaches critical threshold." I thought about the 47,000 people already transformed, their families watching them stand motionless, with phosphorescent eyes, not understanding that their loved ones had become something else entirely. How many more will be integrated before the silence arrives? At current propagation rates, approximately 200,000 additional consciousness patterns. Nearly 250,000 people would die if we succeeded, but if we failed, all of humanity would be absorbed into an alien collective that would use us as shields against forces we couldn't comprehend. I need to know something, I said to Webb. Your daughter's thesis, did she ever theorize about acceptable losses in first contact scenarios? Webb's laugh was bitter. She calculated that any successful first contact would require sacrificing initial communication teams to establish protective protocols for the larger population. She called it expendable intelligence gathering. And you're willing to become expendable intelligence? I've been expendable since Emily died. This just gives the sacrifice meaning. Tyler's form solidified as he made some kind of decision. The refugee collective will not willingly provide access to Voyager's communication protocols. Forced access requires physical proximity to integrated command nodes. Where are the command nodes? Webb asked. The primary node is located in the refugee vessel currently in Jupiter orbit. Secondary nodes exist within each regional integration center. Regional integration centers? Major population zones where consciousness transformation is being coordinated. The nearest center to your location is... Tyler paused, accessing information streams. The Los Angeles metropolitan area, specifically the Griffith Observatory. Through our impossible windows, I could see Los Angeles in the distance. The city glowed with unnatural light, its skyline transformed into crystalline spires that reached toward the geometric formations in the sky. At the center of it all, the observatory's dome pulsed like a massive eye. How do we get there? I asked. Surface transportation through reality-altered terrain is inadvisable, Garrett said. But the building's quantum substrate modifications allow for dimensional translation. Meaning we can fold space to move directly from this location to the observatory. But the process requires sacrificing coherent matter to create the dimensional bridge. Webb checked his sidearm, still functional despite everything that had happened. What kind of sacrifice? Biological mass equivalent to approximately 60% of average human body weight, Tyler said. The process converts matter to pure information, then uses that information to restructure local space-time. I understood immediately. Someone would have to pay with their life to get the rest of us to the observatory. And based on the mathematical requirements, partial sacrifice wouldn't be sufficient. I'll do it, Webb said. And Harrison, no. Emily would have volunteered for this mission. The least I can do is complete what she started. The geometric formations in the sky were moving faster now, taking defensive positions around the refugee fleets. In the distance, stars continued disappearing as the information silence approached our solar system. Time was running out, and we had one chance to turn humanity's forced evolution into something that might, possibly, save what remained of our species. Webb positioned himself at the center of what had been our workstation, where organic computer growths pulsed with bioluminescent data streams. The dimensional translation process required precise positioning within the building's quantum field matrix. One wrong step, and he'd be scattered across 11 dimensions instead of converted to pure information. Tell me about Emily's thesis one more time, I said, desperate to delay what couldn't be stopped. She hypothesized that successful first contact depended on asymmetric information exchange, Webb replied, his voice steadier than mine. The communicating species that retains informational advantage survives. The one that reveals too much gets absorbed or destroyed. Tyler's phosphorescent form flickered nearby, still isolated from the collective, but serving as our reluctant guide. The dimensional bridge requires complete consciousness coherence during matter-to-information conversion. Any hesitation or fear will disrupt the process. I'm not afraid, Webb said. I'm angry. That's different. Through the breathing walls, I watched the sky above Los Angeles. The refugee fleets had arranged themselves in geometric formations that hurt to observe directly, preparing for defensive engagement with something still hidden in the darkness between stars. Occasionally, entire sections of the night simply ceased to exist. patches of absolute nothing that grew larger with each passing minute. Initiation sequence requires physical contact with the quantum processing nodes, Garrett's distributed voice explained. Harrison, place your hands on the primary interface terminals. Webb approached the organic computer growth. When his palms touched the surface, bioluminescent patterns raced up his arms like living tattoos. His body began to glow with the same phosphorescent light as Tyler's transformed state. I can feel the quantum substrate recognizing my neural patterns, Webb said. It's reading my memories. The process extracts consciousness information first, Tyler explained. Physical matter conversion follows once neural mapping is complete. How long will this take? Approximately 4 minutes for full translation. The building shuddered as something massive passed overhead. Through the impossible windows, I glimpsed one of the refugee vessels, a structure that folded space around itself like origami made of starlight. It was beautiful and terrible, and completely alien to anything that belonged in Earth's sky. The collective is attempting to re-establish contact with my consciousness pattern, Tyler said suddenly. They're offering emergency reintegration. Don't, Webb warned, his body becoming increasingly translucent. We need you isolated until we reach the observatory. Refusing reintegration during combat conditions violates survival protocols. The collective will consider me defective and implement corrective measures. What kind of corrective measures? Forced consciousness termination followed by pattern restoration from archived backup data. They'll kill you and resurrect a more compliant version, I translated. Essentially correct. Webb's legs had dissolved completely now, replaced by streams of living light that flowed into the building's quantum substrate. But his consciousness remained active, speaking through the organic computer systems. Initiating dimensional bridge, his voice echoed from every surface. Target coordinates, Griffith Observatory, Los Angeles. Warning, translation will result in temporary reality displacement at destination point. The room filled with light that existed in colors I had no names for. Space folded in on itself, creating a tunnel through dimensions that shouldn't exist in normal physics. Through the tunnel, I could see our destination. The observatory transformed into a crystalline cathedral that pulsed with the same geometric patterns we'd been decoding for the past 18 hours. Jump, Webb's voice commanded, now before the bridge collapses. Tyler leaped first, his phosphorescent form stretching across dimensional boundaries like elastic light. I followed, feeling my body compressed and elongated through spaces that existed perpendicular to reality. For an instant, I experienced consciousness in 11 dimensions, seeing past and future simultaneously, feeling the mathematical structure underlying all matter, understanding why the refugees could exist as pure information. Then I crashed onto the observatory's transformed floor, gasping and retching as my brain struggled to process normal three-dimensional existence again. The interior of Griffith Observatory had become something from the fevered dreams of cosmic architects. The familiar domed ceiling stretched infinitely upward, containing what appeared to be a functional galaxy in miniature. Banks of organic computers lined the walls, their surfaces crawling with equations that rewrote themselves continuously. At the center of it all stood a figure I recognized, Dr. Amanda Kessler, though her body now glowed with the same phosphorescent light as Tyler's. Dr. Grant, she said, her voice harmonizing with itself in frequencies that made my teeth ache. You're earlier than projected calculations indicated. We came to stop you, I said, struggling to stand on floors that felt like they were breathing. You came to die, she corrected. The information silence has reached your solar system's outer boundary. Integration must complete within the next 97 minutes, or your species faces total information erasure. Through the observatory's transformed dome, I could see the truth of her statement. Half the stars visible from Earth had simply vanished, leaving growing patches of absolute void. And in those voids, something vast was moving. Structures so large they dwarfed planets, built from materials that absorbed light itself. The silence ships, Tyler whispered beside me. I had forgotten how massive they are. Ships? I stared at the approaching darkness. Those are vessels. Harvest platforms, Kessler explained. They process entire stellar regions, reducing complex information patterns to base quantum states. Your sun will provide approximately 6 standard time units of operational energy. 6 hours, Tyler translated. They'll consume your star in 6 hours. The organic computers throughout the observatory pulsed in unison, processing massive amounts of data. I could see refugee consciousness patterns flowing between the machines. Billions of individual minds linked in preparation for what they believed would be their salvation. "Where's the connection to Voyager?" I demanded. Kessler gestured toward the dome's center, where a pillar of crystallized light extended into the miniature galaxy above. "Primary communication relay. All probe enhancement protocols route through this node." I approached the pillar, but found my way blocked by geometric barriers that existed in dimensions I couldn't properly perceive. "Let me through." Negative. Unauthorized access to primary communication systems would compromise defensive preparations. "Defensive preparations that are doomed to fail," Tyler said suddenly. "The collective's combat simulations consistently show 97.3% probability of total consciousness erasure upon silence contact." Kessler's phosphorescent glow flickered. "Combat simulations are incomplete. Accumulated consciousness mass provides theoretical protection against information consumption." Theoretical, Tyler emphasized. But previous encounters with 17 civilizations resulted in 100% integration failure. "You're all going to die," I realized, "and you're taking us with you." The building shook as something massive settled onto the observatory grounds. Through the transparent sections of wall, I could see other refugee vessels landing throughout Los Angeles, crystalline structures that began connecting with organic bridge networks, creating a unified consciousness processing matrix that stretched across the entire metropolitan area. "Final integration phase is commencing," Kessler announced. "All remaining unintegrated consciousness patterns will be absorbed within 30 minutes. Including us?" "Including everyone within a 50-kilometer radius." I could feel it starting, a subtle pressure in my skull that grew stronger with each heartbeat. The same geometric patterns that had transformed Tyler and Garrett were beginning to impose themselves on my neural pathways. But unlike them, I'd been exposed to Webb's anger, his determination to spite the forces that would consume his species. "Tyler," I said, fighting against the pressure in my head, "can you access Voyager's communication protocols from here?" "Not without collective authorization codes." "What about with collective authorization codes?" Tyler's form solidified as he made a decision that would either save or damn us all. "Dr. Kessler possesses primary node access credentials." I turned to face the transformed xenobiologist. "Give us the codes." "I cannot compromise collective security for individual preference." "Even if individual preference might actually save the collective." "Explain." I explained Webb's plan: reverse integration, cascade failure, turning the refugees' own technology into a weapon against the information silence. Kessler listened with growing alarm as her enhanced consciousness processed the mathematical implications. Deliberate neural cascade failure would result in total consciousness extinction for all integrated patterns, she said finally. But might disrupt the silence's information processing enough to make this stellar region unpalatable for consumption, I finished. Might. Theoretical possibility exists within acceptable probability ranges. Then give me the fucking codes. For a moment that lasted eternity, Kessler stood motionless while her enhanced consciousness calculated survival probabilities across multiple scenarios. Outside, the information silence continued its approach, systematically erasing stars from existence as it prepared to process everything our sun had created over billions of years. Finally, she spoke a sequence of numbers and mathematical concepts that bypassed human language entirely, downloading directly into my brain through the integration pressure I'd been fighting. I reached for the crystalline communication pillar, knowing that touching it would begin the cascade failure that would destroy every integrated consciousness on Earth, including the 200,000 humans who'd already been absorbed. Webb had been right. Sometimes spite was the only victory available. I pressed my palm against the crystal and began rewriting the future. The crystalline pillar burned through my palm like frozen fire, uploading cascade failure protocols directly into my nervous system. Around me, the transformed observatory began to scream, not through sound, but through electromagnetic frequencies that made reality itself vibrate in harmonics of agony. Kessler's phosphorescent form flickered like a dying bulb. Cascade initiated. Neural coherence failure propagating through collective networks. How long? I gasped, feeling my own consciousness beginning to fragment as the reverse integration protocols took hold. 17 minutes for complete collective dissolution. Tyler collapsed beside me, his body becoming increasingly translucent as his refugee consciousness patterns unraveled. The silence, it's responding to the chaos, slowing its approach. Through the dome, I watched the harvest platforms hesitate in their systematic advance. The growing patches of absolute void stopped expanding as the information silence encountered something it couldn't immediately process. A stellar region where consciousness was destroying itself faster than it could be consumed. It worked, I whispered, then began coughing up blood as my own neural pathways started failing. The organic computers throughout the observatory were dying, their bioluminescent patterns stuttering into darkness. Across Los Angeles, the crystalline structures began crumbling as the consciousness networks that sustained them collapsed. Every integrated human fell simultaneously, 200,000 people dropping where they stood as their enhanced neural architecture burned out. But the refugees were dying too. Billions of consciousness patterns that had fled across the galaxy for 2.3 million years were finally finding the peace they'd never sought. The collective ending. Tyler's voice faded to a whisper. Thank you. He dissolved into motes of light that scattered like luminous snow. I slumped against the failing pillar, watching through the dome as the information silence's harvest platforms began withdrawing. The absolute void patches started shrinking, returning normal spacetime to regions that had been temporarily erased. Stars flickered back into existence as the silence decided this stellar region contained too much chaotic information to process cleanly. My vision blurred as neural cascade failure reached my brain's quantum substrates. But I lived long enough to see the first sunrise over Los Angeles in 18 hours. Normal sunlight, unfiltered by impossible geometries, falling on a city full of sleeping people who would wake with gaps in their memory and no understanding of how close they'd come to losing everything that made them human. From Congressional Intelligence Oversight Committee to National Security Archive. Classification eyes only. Date redacted. Final report. Project Lighthouse incident. Recovery teams found Dr. Tobias Grant's body in the ruins of Griffith Observatory, along with evidence of massive electromagnetic discharge consistent with theoretical models of consciousness cascade failure. No other survivors located. Satellite imagery confirms the simultaneous collapse of 200,847 individuals across 37 nations. Medical examination suggests massive neural trauma, cause unknown. Cover story of viral encephalitis outbreak has been disseminated to global media. Deep space monitoring indicates Voyager 1 has resumed normal telemetry transmission. All previous geometric signal patterns have ceased. Probe's computer systems show no evidence of external modification. Recommendation: file Project Lighthouse under National Security. Exception 7 Alpha. Destroy all related documentation. Reassign surviving personnel to unrelated departments. Note: Dr. Grant's final log entry, recovered from his personal files, suggests the consciousness cascade failure created sufficient informational chaos to render our solar system unpalatable to the phenomenon designated information silence. Long-term monitoring protocols have been established, but current data suggests the threat has withdrawn beyond detection range. Cost assessment: 200,847 civilian casualties prevented approximately 8 billion casualties. Operation classified as strategic success with acceptable losses. Dr. Emily Webb's thesis, Mathematical Protocols for Asymmetric First Contact Scenarios, has been classified and removed from Stanford University archives. Her father's sacrifice validated her theoretical framework for expendable intelligence gathering during xenological encounters. Final notation. Voyager 1 continues its mission into interstellar space, now carrying the quantum echoes of consciousness patterns from 17 extinct civilizations and the electromagnetic ghost of humanity's first and hopefully last contact with refugee intelligence from beyond our galaxy. The probe's trajectory will carry these echoes into the cosmic dark, where they will travel for billions of years, a memorial to species that chose extinction over absorption, silence over integration. Case closed.